Big change, not surprising considering how cruel the Trump administration has been, but we knew changes were coming to the federal food stamp program, and they are here. The Trump administration, brushing aside literally tens of thousands of protest letters, gave final approval on Wednesday to a rule that will remove nearly 700,000 people from the federal food stamp program by strictly enforcing federal work requirements. The change is expected to shave nearly $5.5 billion from food stamp spending over 5 years. That's one way to put it, shaving it. It's cutting federal funding for food stamps by literally billions of dollars by an administration that decided, you know what, $1.5 to $2 trillion, take it, top 0.1 of 1%. They handed over so much money, and now they're gonna have to pay for it, and they're not gonna have the rich do it. They're gonna have people who literally need federal assistance to make sure that they have enough to eat each day. They're gonna put it on their backs. Now, really fast, let's go over some of how this is gonna be done. The department has also proposed a rule that would close what it calls a loophole that allows people with incomes up to 200% of the poverty level. That's about $50,000 for a family of 4. So clearly, these are, think of like the pharaohs of old. They're like living like in opulence and luxury. They won't apparently be able to receive food stamps once this change is made. That's gonna strip nearly 3 million people of their benefits, and nearly 1 million children would lose automatic eligibility for free or reduced price school meals. Look, I'm joking to some extent because with stories like this, I have to not lose my mind. But the constant assaults on food stamps of all programs in December of all months for a Christian administration, that is something.
Oh yes, I'm sure Mike Pence sleeps very well on his pillow, you know, like the Christian that he is. Yeah, I mean, part of the reasoning that they cited for this abject cruelty was that the economy is doing well and everyone has jobs, so no one needs it anymore. Well, so you're so committed to this fiction that the economy is doing well because unemployment is low and that underemployment isn't a real thing, and that not everyone doesn't have benefits and it's a gig economy and everyone isn't making enough money. Yeah, you're so committed to that fiction that you're just going to be gratuitously mean. And that's because what the administration feeds off of is this perception that there are takers, and that, you know, feeding to the base that like, oh yeah, it's the welfare queens, it's the black people, it's the brown people that are really just sucking the resources out of the government, when in reality it's the oil subsidies, it's the tax cuts for the rich, it's everyone on top. It's the oldest trick in the book, and the fact that they're still able to get away with it astounds me, because Reagan, you know, started this to a large extent, and I think when we see the resurgent left, we're beginning to be able to combat this fiction, but it's proving harder and harder than I thought it should be.
Yeah, and like the amount, like this is such a tiny little drop in the additional tax cuts that they just gave.
Exactly.
The wealthy, let alone previous rounds of tax cuts.
And just a quick point, sorry, like even if there's a tiny amount of waste, this is a program that's going to benefit, like the majority of people are not abusing it, and there's always government waste with every program.
Yeah.
So what do you value? Would you rather have a program that allows people to eat, or would you rather crack down and eliminate most of that program because there's a tiny amount of waste, when you could make up for that money in like a 0.001% tax increase on the wealthy?
Exactly. And this is the sort of change that thankfully and kind of surprisingly, when it was announced yesterday, I mean, we'd known about some of the details, but when the final results were announced yesterday, I actually saw quite a bit of discussion about it on social media. There was coverage of it on the major news sources, and that's good, and that's fleeting and already leaving. By Monday, there's not gonna be much talk about this, and it will have been just another thing to add to the long pile of incredibly cruel and needless assaults on people who can least weather these sorts of assaults that we've experienced over the last couple of years. And again, it's just a reminder, a daily reminder of the power of the presidency and why you don't casually hand it over to someone for some sort of political strategy. Donald Trump gets to do this. People, hundreds of thousands or millions of people will suffer. Some potentially could die. We know that already so many kids go to sleep in America literally every night having not had enough to eat. This will increase that. And this will be one more thing that, best case scenario, we get a progressive in 2020, they will have another battle that they will have to wage just to get back to the status quo of pre-2017. And so we just keep adding things to that pile. And it just gets harder and harder when we already have so much that president is going to have to do to make it so that they need to reverse all of the environmental regulation changes and now food stamps, all the budgetary changes. They have to reassemble the staffs of so many federal departments that have been gutted over the past couple of years, or had people put in who are they're there to subvert its goals, its mission statement. It's just a reminder of how bad things have gotten.
Yeah, because their mission again is not to govern, it is to get rid of government and break government down, because one, benefits corporations, but two, the philosophy of these Ayn Randian radical conservatives is that government is basically an obstacle to get over, as opposed to something that could actually do good in the world, which is just an archaic philosophy that has been proven wrong time and time again in countries all over Europe and around the world. Countries like Brazil, where you had Lula, a strong progressive, 80% approval, lifted millions out of poverty, just countless times. But because in the United States, we are so committed to this fiction of individualism, and it's so pervasive in our society, Republicans can get away with terrible things like this, where they blame government programs or a tiny amount of wasted government programs on the poor, on the least fortunate, and are able to get away with murder at the very top.
Yeah, and one final thing. I know that this is a go-to and it's been done many times. We have not talked about this sort of thing in a while, but just to put it into perspective, they're saying they need to cut out the waste. Also, some philosophical opposition to people being poor. They think that they deserve it, but they got to cut out the waste. So $5.5 billion over 5 years is about $1.1 billion per year. So to give you an idea of what you could get, theoretically, you could cut other things to get to that same amount. President Donald Trump's golf hobby has now cost Americans an estimated $115 million in travel and security expenses. So hypothetically, if he had just not played golf, that would pay for 10% of 1 year of these food stamps. That again affects hundreds of thousands of people. This is one man's hobby versus a crush of possibly up to millions of people's ability to get enough food to survive. That would go a measurable way towards covering that gap that they say is there. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.